All right, so some good news in the fight for medical prudence. Britain's National Health Service, the NHS, has banned the use of puberty blockers for children who claim to have gender dysphoria. While fewer than 100 children and teens are currently on blockers in the UK, the number of young people referred to NHS Gender Identity Development Services has ballooned by more than 1,600% in a decade. For more on this landmark decision and what it might mean here in Australia, I'm joined by journalist Bernard Lane, who covers this topic so well for Gender Clinic News. Bernard joins me now. Bernard, take us through this actual decision. What prompted it?
Well, Peter, there's a few elements to it. First of all, an independent expert review of the evidence for puberty blockers, which found that the evidence was very weak and uncertain. We don't know if they're safe. We don't know what effect they have. And also you mentioned the spike in patient numbers and the change in the patient profile. Suddenly a lot of teenage girls, that's the background to it. And so the National Health Service, England, has decided that the puberty blockers should no longer be offered as a routine treatment to young people who are distressed about their gender. Instead, there will be non-invasive psychological and social interventions used now that they're closing down the Tavistock clinic finally on March 31. And through these new regional clinics, which will take over the gender service, they will not be giving puberty blockers as routine treatment.
You talk there about the care of mental health services, psychologists and other things. And I think most people would reasonably say that should be the first order of treatment for young people who have gender dysphoria before anything else, in a medical sense, that sort of course is taken. But we know in Australia, don't we, Bernard, particularly say in Victoria, anyone who might suggest psychological counselling or any sort of mental health treatment for a young person presenting with gender dysphoria is at risk of being taken to court, potentially even locked up for trying to change them out of their mind, even though you just want them to have the best available medical support.
That's right, Peter. And now New South Wales is flirting with one of these badly designed and misleading prohibitions on so-called conversion therapy. I mean, the parallels between the UK with the Tavistock Clinic and the Australian clinics led by the clinic at the Royal Children's Hospital, are very strong, very direct. The allegation in both cases is that the clinicians get fixated on gender. There is a disposition towards medical interventions and counselling which might help a young person become comfortable with their body, the only body they have, is seen as somehow unethical. It's interesting to note that the Australian clinics are probably more radical in their approach than the Tavistock, which is being closed down. At least at the Tavistock, they admitted that giving puberty blockers to kids early was experimental. There was no good evidence for it. And so they actually ran a study. Whereas in Australia, at the Royal Children's Hospital, for example, they simply introduced early puberty blockers as routine treatment and only later began research.
So, Bernard, if we were doing what Britain's done, we'd have an expert inquiry. We've now knocked back 3 of them, 1 in South Australia, 1 in Victoria and 1 in the federal parliament. If we were doing what Britain is doing and the reasons why they're shutting down this affirmation model at Tavistock, we'd actually be shutting down the unit at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, who also believes in this affirmation model. I mean, am I, drawing a wrong parallel there? Is that a fair comment?
Well, Peter, the medicine that's being given, the puberty blockers, is exactly the same. The weak evidence base is shared internationally. It's exactly the same. So there ought to be difficult questions for our health ministers and our hospitals to answer. If these drugs are no longer safe to be given to young people in England, why are they safe to be given to young people in Australia?
Why can't we have an inquiry? I mean, we've got medicos, we've got psychiatrists and others are coming out Bernard, who are saying, if you're so sure you're right, let's have a proper inquiry and defend that position. Why are we not even able to have a proper medical expert inquiry?
I think one reason, Peter, is that things are polarised. These medical interventions are presented as progressive, and so any scepticism or wish to inquire into their safety is misrepresented as being right-wing and hateful. The other reason I think that we haven't had an inquiry in Australia is because the health officials are telling politicians that these kids will commit suicide if they don't get these treatments. Now, that is a false claim. It's a very widely used claim by gender clinics. Just recently, we've had the most comprehensive and rigorous study of gender dysphoria, transition and suicide, and it found that medical transition, which begins with puberty blockers, did not reduce suicide.
And we'll leave it there. Thank you for keeping us across what's happening around the world on this really important issue. Bernard Lane.